Chronic loneliness is defined as feeling lonely 3 times or more a week for an extended period of time. And there's plenty of research that shows that this subjective feeling of loneliness, I'm not talking about the isolation now, just the feeling of it, can really damage our brains in a lot of ways. Some of the effects include poor overall mental ability, poor executive functioning, like, where are we going to park? How do I park the car? Faster cognitive decline, more negative thinking and depression, and earlier onset of Alzheimer's. And if that's not convincing enough, the subjective feeling of loneliness is thought to have adverse health effects that add up as much as obesity. And the popular factoid is that chronic loneliness is as bad for us as smoking a half pack of cigarettes a day. So physically, I'll tell you why I put that arrow there in a minute, because I think it's probably the most important one this morning, weakened immune system. So let's start there. If there's no other reason to help ease loneliness and isolation right now, we need strong immune systems. Other effects include high blood pressure, heart disease. As I said, the effects are as bad as obesity. And what's going on physically is a constant low-level stress on the body, which causes the release of cortisol, which causes inflammation. So that's why you see the physical effects there. And actually, we're watching for this documentary a study that's being done at UCLA looking at using anti-inflammatories to ease the effects of loneliness. So, we may all be taking in a leave to help our loneliness soon, at least the effects of it, but that doesn't do much to talk about the causes. And we really wanted to document that. And on a global level, the causes are many. It's a complicated tapestry. And there is no one smoking gun. Technology, yes. Less time, absolutely. But most of the causes point to a diminished social capital, both on a large level and for us personally. And that's the bank that we have of social connections that we can count on for support, for safety net, for companionship. We delve more into those societal causes in the film, but if you're interested, there is an excellent book that has looked into this called Bowling Alone, which breaks down a fascinating look of how this isn't something that started say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. This is a phenomenon that has really accelerated since the 1960s. But if we keep the camera focused on a close-up of the dozen or so people that we're following, and on us as individuals, you kind of start to see 2 buckets of causes that start to fill up. I'm calling them layers and life courses. And that's a slice of 100-layer lasagna, and that's a rocket taking off. But layers and life courses. In all the people that we're documenting, we're noticing kind of a perfect storm that happens where several things happen at once to cause them to lose their social safety net. And actually, it's been on course for happening the person's entire life in some cases. And the combination then makes it really hard for us to get back up and start rebuilding that safety net again. Let's talk about these trajectories first, because those are really fascinating. And these are things that happen to us through life that kind of set us on a path for possible problems later. And there's starting at birth in terms of loneliness and isolation. There's a Turkish study that has recently come out that looks at people adults who describe themselves as moderately lonely, and finds that many of them, a majority of them, had poor secure attachment, which is the psychological theory of having attachment as an infant to an adult. Good eye contact, close body contact, all this stuff that's very important in the very early stages of development. But these trajectories continue and start a lot all through childhood. I don't know, how many of you in this room were military brats? Anybody? I certainly moved around a lot growing up every 2 or 3 years. And so you know what that's like. You start over. You get really good at starting over and building a new support group of friends, right? But I had a subject matter expert in this film say, you know what? Actually, that makes you more susceptible to loneliness and isolation later in life, because you haven't had the chance to build as many people to put in your caravan of support, as she said, people that you carry through your life, meaningful relationships of people who will be there for you in the crunch later on, who will be there to make your life more whole and complete and less lonely and less isolated. If you have language barriers, if you see yourself as a minority, if you have hearing impairment, mobility issues, mental differences, these are all things starting early in life that can start a trajectory toward having layers come in at some point, life happens, and then making it harder to kind of pick up and move on and start a cycle of loneliness and isolation. So one young woman that we're following is named Khulud. Her family moved to Sudan, from Sudan, I should say, about the same time she was starting school. And I would like you to notice what things are happening to her now at 17 that will make her more vulnerable to loneliness later on in life.
Hi, my name is Khulud. I am 17 years old from Birmingham, England, and I procrastinated to make this for the longest time because I was too afraid to, I felt too self-conscious, I was so anxious about this. My loneliness was basically like a big chunk of my life. I think it started when I was in primary school. I came to this country, didn't speak a word of English, and I found it really hard to make friends. Clearly, I didn't know how to speak. Everyone just seemed really scary and big, and I ended up getting bullied for a couple of years. That was fun. And when I entered secondary school, I decided that I didn't want to live like that anymore. I was going to make friends. This was going to be a fresh start. So in year 7, I tried to make friends. Didn't work out. They sort of just ditched me, kind of. Just stopped hanging out with me. That really hurt. So then after that, being alone and living my life, not interacting with people, just seemed like such an easy way to just live.
For most young people, loneliness is going to be unpleasant, but they're going to be okay. For those who are vulnerable, being lonely and being isolated puts them at really quite significant risk. We see young people being groomed to run drugs, being groomed for sexual exploitation. Adults can see that young people are lonely and isolated, and some adults don't have children's best interests at heart.
So we continue delving into that a little bit, but I'm showing you Khulud this morning to take a look at her trajectory, her life course. And documenting the loneliness of young people is very important to this story because they are the largest group of people who identify most profoundly as lonely and without meaningful connections. They are very connected, but they report having few meaningful connections. So their trajectories are well underway for loneliness and isolation later on in life. And there are plenty of smoking guns that we want to point to. We want to point to technology, we want to point to social media. But the reality is that this disconnection started statistically with the baby boomers in the 1960s, and each progressive generation has become more and more disconnected to the point where now the youngest generation after the millennials report 24% report having no close relationships, 24% report having no acquaintances, and you can compare that to baby boomers who are surveyed, and that's about 10% of baby boomers who report the same thing. At the same time, the younger you are, generally speaking, the less you feel comfortable being put in forced social situations. Has anyone ever taken a long train trip, across country or up and down the coast, right? One of the funnest things to do is the dining car, right? Or some of you may be in this room this morning sitting at a table where you don't know anybody and you have to put yourself out there. Hello, my name is. Well, the dining car is going away. Amtrak is discontinuing the dining car on its East Coast long routes because they say younger people under 30 are complaining about this having to socialize in the dining car. And when surveyed, they report that they would rather have a pre-prepared packaged meal and go off somewhere and sit alone on the train. That's what Amtrak says. There was a lot of pushback from younger people about that. And I would say not go off and sit alone. I'd probably sit alone on your cell phone and device, which is probably what we would all do.